Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Wednesday, May 17th. This is Africa 54. The conflict in Sudan grinds on between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces as the United Nations seeks over $2 billion in aid to assist those affected by the conflict. Kenyan officials say 10 more bodies have been found at the site where the remains of more than 200 victims of a doomsday cult have already been located. And a Congolese entrepreneur provides a lifeline for thousands of internally displaced people in the eastern Congo by offering sustainable, reliable, affordable phone charging services. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. As fighting continues to rage in Sudan between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, the United Nations seeks $3 billion to help people affected by the crisis. VOA's Anthony Labruto reports.
Showing no signs of a let-up in fighting across Khartoum on Wednesday, the distinct piercing sounds of anti-aircraft fire and drones buzzing overhead were heard. Video posted by the Rapid Support Forces on Twitter shows their fighters around the Air Defense Forces command site in Khartoum, shooting in the air and walking around destroyed military vehicles. Reuters news agency was able to confirm the location as Khartoum from the building seen in the videos, which matched file and satellite imagery of the area. However, Reuters was not able to independently verify exactly when the video was taken. Talks mediated by the United States and Saudi Arabia in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, have so far failed to secure a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the United Nations Humanitarian Response Plan is seeking $2.56 billion to help people affected by the crisis in Sudan, according to a senior UN official.
We aim to reach 18 million people. The funding requirements of nearly $2.6 billion is also the highest for any humanitarian appeal for Sudan. And we launched it together with the refugee response plan that my UNHCR colleague, Mr. Mazou, will speak to, because the crisis in Sudan is rapidly evolving into a regional crisis. The needs in Sudan are fundamental and widespread, as you can expect from a conflict.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees on Wednesday made a joint appeal with the aid agency, saying it needs $472 million to assist more than 1 million people over the next 6 months. The conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces is causing a dire humanitarian crisis that threatens to destabilize the region, displacing more than 700,000 people inside Sudan and forcing another 200,000 to flee into neighboring countries. Anthony Labruto, VOA News, Washington.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people are stuck in Port Sudan, battling extreme heat and dwindling supplies of food and water. David Doyle has more.
It's been a month since Sudan's sudden eruption into violence. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced by bombings and gunfire, mainly from the capital Khartoum. But for many still stranded in the coastal city Port Sudan, they're now facing extreme heat and a lack of water and shelter. Among them on Sunday was Reem.
We came from war, and we're staying here in this heat. This is not healthy for these children. We're unable to do anything, and none of the entities are helping. Please help us. Humanitarian organizations, please help us. Not for us, but for the sake of these children. We have pregnant and sick elderly women. We have people whose health could get worse.
Stranded families have been sleeping inside tents they've built from blankets, or huddling in shaded areas as they try to escape the intense sunlight. Meanwhile, the violence they fled continues back in Khartoum. Intense clashes have continued in the capital and its sister cities, Bari and Omdurman, despite Saudi and US brokered talks between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. On Monday, the Sudanese army was carrying out airstrikes in Khartoum's north, targeting paramilitary forces around a hospital. Footage released by the Rapid Support Forces appeared to show extensive damage at the hospital. The location could be independently verified, but not the date. Most hospitals in the capital have already been put out of service. The bloodshed has killed at least 676 people and injured 5,576, according to official figures, though the real toll is expected to be much higher.
David Doy of Reuters filed that report. On April 15th, Khartoum turned into a battleground. But how did the country get to this point? VOA looks back at the critical years that led to the war between the two top generals.
In April 2019, thousands of people crowded the streets of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, to celebrate the ouster of longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir. There was hope the country was entering a new era. A civilian Prime Minister, Abdullah Hamdok, was appointed to lead a transitional government made up of civilians and members of the military. The goal was to prepare for an election and return the country to democracy. But by 2021, cracks had emerged. The country's economy was in tatters, with inflation topping 400% and shortages of key items like bread. The military controlled large sectors of the economy, including banks, mines, and agricultural conglomerates. The military refused to relinquish control. As Hamdok and other civilians tried to institute reforms, the military leadership resisted. On October 25, 2021, Hamdok was placed under house arrest, and soon thereafter, two generals took power. One of them, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti, commanded the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group widely known for its brutality. Hemeti rose to prominence in 2004 as the head of the Janjaweed, a feared militia made up largely of men on horseback. They led a campaign in Darfur that caused the deaths of an estimated 300,000 people and resulted in al-Bashir being indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. The other general, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was head of the Sudan Armed Forces. The two men entered into a tense power-sharing agreement but courted support from different foreign powers. Al-Burhan built close ties with Egypt. Hemeti sought support from Russia and the United Arab Emirates. On April 15, 2023, fighting erupted between the SAF and the RSF. It began near the army headquarters and the airport in Khartoum, but soon engulfed other parts of the city. The SAF used jets to bomb the RSF, who responded with anti-aircraft fire. At least 528 people have been killed and about 4,600 wounded, Sudan's health ministry said, though the real death toll is suspected to be higher. The UN refugee agency UNHCR said more than 128,000 people have left Sudan, and about 900,000 are expected to flee to neighboring countries in the coming weeks. The fighting has spread to other parts of the country, including the fragile western region of Darfur. Experts warned that fighting in Darfur could reignite a deadly conflict from the early 2000s that included massacres that the US recognized as genocide. As foreign governments evacuated citizens, a ceasefire between the two sides was repeatedly broken. The UN official coordinating relief efforts in the country, Abdou Dieng, warned that it is devolving into a full-blown catastrophe. The conflict in Sudan could have a significant impact on neighboring countries and cause regional instability. The influx of Sudanese refugees has put a strain on its neighbors' resources, particularly food, water, and shelter.
Kenyan authorities say 10 more bodies were discovered in the Shakahola forest, where the remains of more than 200 victims of a doomsday cult have already been found. The Coastal Region Commissioner says some rescues were made on Tuesday.
The search and rescue team managed to rescue 3 men, 3 male adults unfortunately in critical condition, and they have been taken to Malindi Sub-County Hospital for stabilization. We've had 4 arrests, and they are all male and in custody, assisting the investigation team with investigations.
Oyancha says hundreds of people are still missing and authorities are continuing to search for remains and survivors throughout the forest in Kenya's southwest. For more on the Kenya cult deaths, I'm joined from Nairobi by Dennis Nthubi, a Kenyan political and governance expert. Mr. Nthubi, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Now, with so many deaths and so many yet to be exhumed, tell us who the leader of this cult, Paul Mackenzie, is and how Kenyans are processing these cult deaths.
Very well. Paul Mackenzie, who is also known as Dengue in another name, has a long history with the arm of the law, severally charged in court with criminal activities and radicalization. And he's basically even been discussed in Parliament. Currently, together with his 3rd wife and 16 others, they are being charged with acts of terror, murder, and kidnapping. So we are looking at Paul Mackenzie as a hardcore criminal, essentially hiding under the facade of religion. In 2019, Paul Mackenzie recanted his undertakings of a church that he had partnered with others, and he went into this ravenous, murderous spree that has indeed shocked the country.
President William Ruto says he is taking responsibility for this tragedy, but what more is being done to educate Kenyans, especially those who are so vulnerable to such cults?
Well, good question. The president has put together a task force to review legal and regulatory framework within the religious forum. And essentially, this will then be an undertaking to sort of entrench reforms that will lead to self-regulation. Because currently, religion, is regulated under the Societies Act, which is a 1968 relic. So it's very important that a legal framework is introduced into the country that will see an aspect of self-regulation and the weeding out of all these murderers and false prophets in the country. The second thing that the president has done is established a judicial commission of inquiry to investigate the murders, the kidnapping, and all these shocking things that we are seeing. The president also, upon taking power almost about 7 months ago, did one of the things that enhanced judicial reforms by making judiciary independent within its funding mechanism, and also dealing with police reforms, whereby Kenya has been on the international map with forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And, the killer squad that was involved with a lot of these forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings, majority of those of its officers are under arrest, and they're being charged with many of these things.
Dennis,
so the president is undertaking.
Right. Now, as authorities investigate these deaths, do we know if they have sought to know exactly what happened to Paul Mackenzie's first and second wife?
The first and second wife of Mackenzie are deceased, and it is not known essentially what happened to them. But I believe that the Judicial Commission of Inquiry will be able to give us an in-depth analysis on the lives and the undertakings of Mackenzie, and also it will be able to give us a face, and an in-depth face and an in-depth analysis on exactly the dealings of the Shakahola Forest Park. 800 acres, almost about 3.2 kilometers, quite advanced. And also, there may be other things that will come into play, because when you look at the cause of death within the victims, you have starvation, suffocation, strangulation, blunt trauma. Majority of these people who are actually children, then the second category of the largest group are women, were killed deliberately for whatever reasons that we are not aware of, at the end of the day. So this commission is essential because it will give us a critical autopsy on exactly what happened
Dennis,
in the Shakahola
right.
massacre.
Very quickly, under the Kenyan law, what possible punishment can justify what Paul Mackenzie has done to so many Kenyans, women, children, men?
Mackenzie is being charged under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So he's facing terrorism charges, he's facing murder charges, he's facing kidnapping charges. There are also other statutory requirements that he may not have followed. For example, failing to bury without permits and informing authorities. There are several other charges that he jointly with 6 others and his third wife will be charged with. And I can tell you that at the lapse of the enforcement agencies in the previous government is what His Excellency has said. Every chief, every police officer that was within that area, a regulatory system within our social frameworks called Nyumba Kumi must be answerable into the lapses that happened, that they never saw this coming. And also within the intelligence sector, was intelligence given? Was it processed? Who then did not enforce? And therefore, His Excellency is going to be cracking the whip within his police force.
Right. Thank you so much, Dennis. Sad story indeed. Dennis Ndumbi is a Kenyan political and governance expert. Authorities in north-central Nigeria are looking for gunmen accused of killing 29 people in a late-night attack on Tuesday. A resident told the Associated Press some attacks were still going on Tuesday evening in some places following the mass killings in 3 villages in Plateau State's Mangu area. Such attacks have become rampant in many parts of Nigeria's northern region. Plateau Governor Simon Bako Lalong described the attack as an attempt to return the state to the dark days of pain and agony. Still to come, efforts to tackle the challenges of fentanyl, abuse, and homelessness right here in the United States. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, a U.S. diplomat alleges that South Africa provided arms to Russia. South Africa's government denies the allegations. Will this affect the relationship between Pretoria and Washington? Also, an exclusive Voice of America reporting trip takes us to parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the M23 rebels ruled. We'll look at the lives of the people affected. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Kigali, we are here for the BAL Finals. For the best of African basketball. The Sahara and Nile Conference delivered their verdict. The top 8 teams on the continent are chasing the Holy Grail. Who will be the next BAL champion? It's game time.
In other news, a Tunisian judicial official says in recent days the bodies of 9 migrants from sub-Saharan African countries have been found in the western Tunisian mountains near its border with Algeria. Authorities have launched an investigation, including autopsies, to determine the cause of the deaths. French media is reporting that French forces tried to use journalist Olivier Dubois' visit to northern Mali in 2021 to track a jihadist leader, but failed to prevent the reporter from being kidnapped by militants. Dubois was abducted by the Al-Qaeda-linked group to support Islam and Muslims in Gao in April 2021. He was freed in March. And South Africa's Foreign Affairs Ministry says 6 African leaders trying to broker peace in Russia's war in Ukraine is scheduled to launch their mission to Moscow and Kyiv in early June, but the dates must still be confirmed. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says America's leading cause of overdose deaths is synthetic opioids, mostly fentanyl. U.S. law enforcement says illicit fentanyl is cheaply made from chemicals, mostly coming from China, trafficked through Mexico and then smuggled into the United States. VOA's Natasha Mosgovaya looks at community efforts to tackle the challenges of fentanyl abuse and homelessness.
Hey, Virgil. Elizabeth. Yeah.
Kent Hay has been coming to this encampment on the Green River outside Seattle for more than 2 years, trying to persuade people here to get addiction treatment and move to shelter.
If we can get you approved, they're going to fund it starting in April.
Okay, so I need to get this done.
Yeah.
All right.
Fentanyl abuse is common here, where the smell of burning pills mixes with the aroma of campfire smoke.
It's rare that I come across a person who's not using, fentanyl. And so it's hard to get those people to participate in treatment.
Addressing the combined challenges of fentanyl addiction and homelessness can be politically polarizing. King County Council member Sarah Perry says the solution requires response on multiple levels, including community involvement.
There are people. They come from our zip codes. They stay in our zip codes. These are our kids and our parents and our siblings and our cousins. They can't just go away somewhere. We have to own this together and do the right thing so everyone has a safe place to live and everybody feels safe walking around.
Letting drug addicts decide when they're ready for treatment is inhumane, says former County Council member Kathy Lambert. She wants mandatory inpatient rehabilitation.
They need a place where they are essentially forced to use the time to get their bodies cleaned up so that they can make good decisions. And like anybody else, if you walked along the street and you saw somebody having an appendicitis attack, you don't say to them, I'll take care of you when you're ready. You immediately scoop them up and get them services. That's what's needed here.
At the University of Washington Center for Community-Engaged Drug Education, Epidemiology and Research, Caleb Banta-Green says improving social and medical services is more effective and less damaging than mandatory treatment.
Before we start trying to force people to treatment, what I would argue is, why don't we make far better treatment services that people actually want? Because when we do, they line up for it.
In the meantime, outreach workers like Hay continue to meet fentanyl addicts where they are and try to get them help. Natasha Mosgovaya, VOA News, Auburn, Washington.
In part 4 of Killer Fentanyl, VOA looks at how social stigmas around fentanyl addiction discourage some addicts from seeking help. U.S. President Joe Biden leaves for Japan Wednesday and the Group of Seven summit in Hiroshima, but he is canceling his extended trip abroad to Papua New Guinea and Australia to continue debt ceiling talks with congressional leaders.
I'm confident we're going to continue to make progress toward avoiding default and fulfilling America's responsibility as a leader on the world stage. However, I'm cutting my trip short. I'm postponing the Australia portion of the trip and my stop in Papua New Guinea in order to be back for the final negotiations with congressional leaders. And I spoke today with Prime Minister Albanese of Australia and a short time ago and let him know what was going on. There was an overwhelming consensus, I think, in today's meeting of the congressional leaders that defaulting on the debt is simply not an option. Our economy would fall into recession. It would devastate retirement accounts, increase borrowing costs.
Biden leaves for Hiroshima on Wednesday for meetings with leaders from the world's leading industrial nations, including Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. Leaders will try to find alignment in countering Beijing's use of trade and investment restrictions, boycotts, and sanctions practices the West views as Chinese economic coercion. They will do so through export controls and restrictions on investment from their own nations to China, while seeking to slow China's technological advancement and reduce its dominance of the global supply chain. A Congolese entrepreneur provides a lifeline for thousands of internally displaced people in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, offering sustainable, reliable, affordable phone, charging, and secretarial services. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Katembo Mwanga Pascal could not find a job in his field, information technology or IT, because of the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So he started a small cell phone charging business at this small makeshift shop right outside the entrance of Bulengo camp for internally displaced people, about 15 kilometers west of Goma, the provincial capital of North Kivu.
I studied information technology. That's where I got the knowledge to be creative. That was my main objective, and that's how I started. So I created this business so that I don't have to depend on anybody, but rather myself.
Katembo used his tech skills to turn his shop into a lifeline for IDPs. He provides phone charging and secretarial services for businesses inside and outside the camp. And he says some days for both businesses, the phone charging and the secretarial bring in good money. On other days, he barely breaks even.
I decided to start this business here because people used to go photocopy their documents in town. They had to pay for a taxi and travel outside of the camp. I realized this was a problem, so I wanted to help them.
But for now, he makes enough money to sustain his family. Katembo himself is displaced. He arrived in Bulengo nearly a year ago after fleeing fighting in his hometown of Masisi, a mineral-rich area in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. He started this business to help solve the camp's phone charging needs because there was no electricity. The Bulengo camp is cut off from the primary power grid, so people rely on expensive and unreliable alternative energy sources.
Most of the people here are internally displaced people, or IDPs. They bring their cell phones and I charge for them. And others bring their documents for me to photocopy for them for a small fee depending on the type of phone.
Now his shop offers printing and other services and sells mobile phone accessories as well. With the income, he has purchased a generator which provides constant electricity to charge phones and rechargeable lamps.
I charge every electronic gadget, from cell phones to electronic torches, solar lamps, radios, and anything else that needs charging.
Katembo is glad to contribute towards solving a problem for camp residents. He thinks that his business model can be replicated in different areas of Goma and hopes to expand this business to other camps around Goma, even further away. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
Very inspiring. Paul, thank you for that report. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.